Welcome to Body Wisdom 360, helping you turn mental fitness into daily practice so you can use your energy to lead and not just to survive. My name is Claudia and I'm the founder of the Body Wisdom 360 program, and I also am the initiator of the leadership Hardtalk. I personally believe that individuals create success, not companies, and that the values we hold and the thoughts we think create the reality of how we perform at work and in life. Today, our Heart Talk number 4 is we are going to talk about a topic that affects every individual, every team, every leader, and every workplace. And it is the invisible boundaries. Not in the theoretical sense, but in real everyday behavior that shapes stress levels, performance, and well-being, often without anyone noticing, because we run subconscious systems. And today's Heart Talk took me much longer to prepare than I thought that I anticipated, because, and I tell you why, because boundaries are unbelievable, multifaceted, and they run through every part of our lives: how we think, how we feel, how we lead, how we relate, and how we protect our own energy. And they are so important that I'm convinced we will need actually a few more than one Heart Talk sessions on this subject. So today, as always, I want to start with the individual and how we set, ignore, or misunderstand boundaries is deeply influenced by something we rarely talk about, especially in the leadership space, and this is childhood programming. We all have those inner critics, those very human and universal patterns, like the perfectionist, the stickler, the hyperachiever, the victim, or the hypervigilant. And they were all created in childhood to help us feel connected, to feel loved, to feel heard and seen. And back then, they protected us. These patterns protected us. But today, they can quietly sabotage us without us even noticing. And they also help us literally to survive. And not only in toxic family environments, but also in school environments or friendship groups, etc. And these patterns we honed in during childhood can also subconsciously drain our energy and hijack our performance, our well-being. Back then, they were really important. Back then, these childhood patterns were survival strategies and they made perfect sense then. But now, as adults and as leaders, those childhood patterns often show up in ways that push us too far, make us say yes when we mean no, or take on responsibilities where they were never ours in the first place. And many successful leaders I work with grew up in environments where being responsible was praised, doing more than others was praised, saying yes meant you were good, you had more capacity. Taking charge was expected because that's what made the parents proud. And speaking up about things that, made us feel uncomfortable or they weren't good for us were dismissed with simply, like push through and you will learn from it. So let's be honest, how we learned boundaries as children still shapes how we lead today. And like always, I want to begin with a small personal story because I believe that sharing real experiences creates connection and sparks awareness and change. And I'm just imagining, a childhood photograph of mine when I was maybe about, 3-4 years old, being hugged from my mom and my brother. I never really felt safe, but that photo showed me something different. And I would like to, like in hindsight, in all the coaching I've done, and when we're digging deep, um, what came out for me was that as a child I was never heard and seen. That's the story I I created for myself. And sometimes the stories we create for ourselves um, can really stop us from becoming great, becoming successful, become, you know, like a like the person we want to be. And in this picture which I have in my mind about, my parents or my mother and my brother are hugging me, and my later belief that um, I wasn't heard and I wasn't seen, um, has created quite a conflict for a while in my head, because I thought, well, if I look back at this photograph, it feels so harmonious and it feels so true and so happy. And but in reality, I was the youngest of five, and um, I was going on everybody's nerve, so to speak, and a lot of other issues when you are the youngest. Maybe you can relate to this, but you always have to fight for your voice, and you always have to use your inner critic and your experience as a child to maneuver through and so on. So yeah, anyway, I'll just sorry for drifting off a little bit, but childhood programming is what, in my experience, has a huge connection to how we lead, you know, how we spend money, how we engage with others, how empathic we are, and so on. And yeah, so it is not that my parents didn't care. They did. They did care about me, but they sometimes didn't see me. They didn't hear, they haven't heard me. And it was just like, move on, go ahead, push through. And if you fall off a horse, or if you hurt yourself, it's like, by the time you're married, the pain will be gone, kind of message. So, yeah, so it's not that our parents didn't care, but it is, in my case, that they came from a different generation, from a war generation. My father served in the Second World War. He was a prisoner of war for 5 years. He survived. His boundaries were shaped by survival. And my mother grew up during and after the war, and she was a child without a father. And there's a lot of very bad names they call children who are born without father. I don't want to even say it. But so shame was given to her for something that's never been her fault in the first place when she was born. But in regard to boundaries, my mother let everyone belittle her without fighting back, almost as if boundaries are not even available for her. Both my parents had very good values. They worked hard, they went to church on Sundays, they helped others in the village, they saved money, they've been kind, they don't destroy public property, they don't wasted other people's time, and always concerned about what would the neighbors say. I'm sure many of you can relate to this. But emotional safety, the most important boundaries we can learn, I think, were definitely something they had never heard of, and therefore simply didn't pass them on to me or my 4 siblings. What I did learn, though, were those controlling boundaries. If you overstep a boundary set by my father, for example, the shouting will start again. And I was so scared. And I knew exactly where the invisible lines were. I can't tell you today how I knew them, but I knew crossing them meant fear. My father was spreading fear through loud and angry tirades of demanding behaviors, which he himself actually never displayed. He was aggressive when he was upset. It was scary. And today I know he didn't do it to make, he did do it to make us better. He only knew this way. No excuse actually, but I still forgive him again and again when I realize another outdated belief that I still carry today from, from the past. And yeah, learning never ends. And for children, one of the most common and well documented causes of emotional trauma is chronic, loud, and aggressive shouting. And I inherited this behavior, and it took me a few really good friends and my children to see what's actually needed, and that change is possible at any time and at any age. And having not learned what emotional boundaries are is what I often see in my coaching too. And it consistently creates deep subconscious beliefs of not feeling good enough in my clients as well. And many leaders have this feeling of, I'm not good enough, despite great success in the past. And they too report that there were no conversations about why boundaries matter, or being clear about those boundaries, being clear about, like when they were small, there was no time to talk about it. And they too talk about they had to respect boundaries but never learned how to set their own in a good way. They too had no guidance on emotional needs. They too had no support in finding their own voice. And yet they are natural leaders, but without healthy boundaries in leadership especially, those invisible ones become food for burnout. And here are a few examples about repeating childhood programming, like expecting the invisible line must be understood and not overstepped by others. I overperformed to show them this is how you do it. I tried to look good despite feeling very overwhelmed or disappointed on the inside. I want to be appreciated as a leader, but I realize I don't, it doesn't reflect, it doesn't mirror. And I can say what I think, but I expect others to be humble. And these are the boundaries, the invisible boundaries I want to talk about. These are these silent blocks, those invisible blocks that stop us from, I think, from, connecting with others, because connection, when you connect with somebody at eye level, yeah, when you connect with somebody because you're having a similar a similar goal, and without demanding that somebody does something you need. Yeah, these are invisible boundaries which I want to talk about, and the subconscious programming that we're not aware of. And so the question is, how can we set boundaries later in life that help us feel emotionally safe? Because remember, emotions always win. That's one of my most powerful realizations. Emotions always win, and the bad ones more often than the good ones. And in my case, these invisible, unspoken boundaries that were not set caused burnout twice. I had to learn the hard way that boundaries are not instructions for others, not the rules we impose or demand people must follow. And giving our thoughts shape and talk about the boundaries is step one. Boundaries are not instructions to others. Boundaries are values and needs that we need to identify for ourselves first. In my coaching, I use visualization and storytelling to make boundaries visible. It works amazingly well. Boundaries are connected to our values, to our capacity and our self-respect. And boundaries and belonging have to go hand in hand when it comes to feeling connected and safe in our families, at work. And many people don't know their values at all. They adapt to family systems, they adapt to company demands and systems. They push through systems that are completely misaligned with what they do and who they are. And then they wonder why they can't perform at their best, why they have consistent physical issues. This is another subject for a really great heart talk, the physical issues. I will come up with one soon. And so let's start with values. Knowing our values, knowing them clearly helps us to set healthy boundaries. And I'd like to invite everyone who is listening now to do a little exercise later. Take 15 minutes and take a childhood photograph of yourself and put that photograph in front of you. Zoom yourself back into that time, into those feelings, that those emotions you connect with the photograph, and ask yourself two important questions. Did I learn healthy boundaries from my parents or caretakers? And the other question is, do I feel safe to talk about my needs with my partner, my family, my friends, colleagues, my boss? Yeah. And these simple exercises can bring outdated beliefs to the surface. And this is great stuff for reflection. So I will have my team joining in a moment, and we'll be back shortly. So now Sophia and Sara are here. Thank you so much for joining today, talking about this very multifaceted subject of those invisible boundaries, which we all somehow, or many of us somehow, don't even realize we have. You have read the brief for today, so we are all on the same page. And I want to open the floor today with the first question. What is one moment at work where you realized you pushed yourself beyond your limit, but only later understood why? And what old rule or childhood message might have been driving that behavior? I think that, everybody has a moment to think right now.
And just repeat the question again so we've got it in our heads.
Okay. What is one moment at work where you realized you pushed beyond your limits, but only later understood why? Maybe, what I'm trying to say is where you said, yes, 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 I do it, okay, yes. But only later you understood why. What old rule or what old childhood message, childhood programming might have been driving that behavior?
I can definitely locate something quite quickly because it's kind of springs to mind straight away, and it was in my classroom days. So leading classes, if you like, and in moments of high stress where there are a lot of emotions in the room, whether that be with teams or with teenagers, I was not aware at the time of the contagion in terms of how we pick up each other's emotions and how that escalates. And if you're talking about childhood programming, I was not conscious of it at the time, but I was always one to make sure everyone could stay calm and to try and appease and to placate and to make sure everyone is happy. And that can only be done in certain situations. And when you have 30 people in a single room and you might have people coming in and pulling other people out for various problems, trying to sort of manage and juggle all of that is extraordinarily stressful. And if you cannot regulate yourself, if you're not used to that, then it just snowballs and snowballs. And I think possibly there was a time, a period in my career where I would take that home to my family, not knowing, and continue to perpetuate this kind of, I need to keep them happy as well. But if you're not yourself, if you're finding it really hard to keep that sort of, we call it the pillar of strength in body wisdom.
Yeah.
If you cannot ground yourself and understand that that is yours and this is mine, and this is what I am willing to accept, and this is what I'm not willing to accept, and this is how I want to turn up and show up for other people. If all those boundaries are really blurred, the stress that escalates as a result of that is phenomenal. So as soon as you said it, that was, I could picture myself in that situation, as I'm sure many teachers and many leaders and managers will be familiar with.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Sarah, to that?
Okay.
How, in the moment, in the classroom, with the situation that you're dealing with at that moment, how did that manifest? What decisions were you making that you perhaps should, I never like to use the word should, but what decisions were you making that your boundaries would have, that better boundaries would have helped avoid, or what
Such
were
a good
the
question,
actual,
Sophia.
yeah.
Yeah, because once I'd learned or started to learn how to manage this, I was able to breathe through it. But before then, I would lose my breath and I would become increasingly more resentful of the situation, because you start to feel like a victim, like a sitting duck almost, if you know the expression. But that idea of the world is suddenly against you and you're trying to handle everything. So the resentment that comes with all of this is happening to me, rather than I'm going to choose to do this next. To not have a sense of self in that moment, but just a sense of everything else that is going on around you and how it impacts on you. Those blurry lines are so dangerous, I think. Now, I don't know if I just answered your question. Could you say your question again?
Well, I know it's a very widespread question.
Yeah.
But in this situation, Sarah, where that you just described, how can you relate back to your childhood programming? What did you bring from your childhood programming into the classroom that made you react the way you did?
Yeah, probably a need to fix everything.
Correct.
That I took responsibility onto my shoulders at that moment, that it was my responsibility to make other people feel things and behave in a certain way, and not to understand. I was not understanding that there was a lot out of my control at that moment. So there was a lot at play there, but maybe it's that idea of this is my fault when it wasn't. It actually wasn't.
Yes. And I think when it comes to leadership, a lot of leaders have this childhood programming of being a fixer. They are used to it from my experience and from all the RTT work I've done, and from all the CEO coaching I do now, and leadership coaching I do now. This is where, when I sometimes take people back to their childhood, whether it is through a hypnotherapy or whether it is just, identifying what were the things you had, enjoyed most as a child, or what were the things, that pressured you as a child. These things surface, and these things, I mean, this ingrained, this honed in sense of responsibility. That's why leaders are leaders today, because they've been carrying it all the way from childhood. They had, maybe there were like, parents had no time to look after the children, so they had to, manage their own kind of afternoons after school or whatever. Maybe there were toxic relationships at home. Maybe there was some, really bad stuff going on, alcohol or other, things going on at home. And children learn very quickly how to take responsibility to carry on, to move through. And this is where positive intelligence coaching or body wisdom is actually so important. Once you understand that these traits, these abilities were actually created during your childhood simply for the reason to make you survive, to struggle through any situation. And even when people have like really good homes, really good, parents and stuff like that, the same stuff of, maneuvering through can happen at school or with friends and things like that. When we are young, at that time, the first 10 years of our life, we know nothing. So we are taking everything for granted. We don't have the experience, the ability to speak back or to question back. Why are you doing this? No, you just do it. You have an inner guide who tells you, okay, I'll take all this responsibility now, because that makes me the good one. That makes me get the praise. That makes me, get the little sticker on my whatever. That makes me get the chocolate or whatever. And this kind of responsibility is moving with us into our leadership roles. A lot of leaders say the same thing. I've always been responsible. I've always took care of everything. And I've always, this kind of, I do it myself. I better do it myself, because otherwise, it's never been done. And when you are in your 50s, in your, when you are at that age, you realize you can't handle it anymore. It's too much. And and your performance and your well-being starts to deteriorate. And it's because of the stuff we're bringing with us from childhood.
I want to add something here, because I want to make sure we're not being too kind of tunnel vision focused on negative experiences influencing the way that you build your leadership capacity. I think that there's that there are nuanced experiences across someone's childhood that might fold into the way they act, behave, make decisions as they're older. And it doesn't necessarily only have to be something uncomfortable or traumatic. I think that sometimes I feel that there is too much focus on the impact of trauma. I'm thinking a few other examples. I mean, I can think of a few examples from me if you still want me to answer that first question. But something that's coming up for me is someone super close to me recently told me that their grandparents, when they were younger, used to, on a routine basis, and they spent a lot of time together, on a routine basis, they would see their grandmother sitting at the kitchen table writing down the week's expenses down to the penny. Like, went to the market, bought this got paid, this got paid. And this book lived on the kitchen table, which for me, I'm thinking about my childhood and the kitchen table and what that was, and the kind of the hearth of the house, and and for this person, the kitchen table was the place where money was counted, and we counted pennies, and we made sure that we were on track financially as a family. Now, fast forward that into adulthood, and this is a person who, it's not just about money, but it's the decision-making capacity and the leadership capacity around holding a project or a life and knowing where the buck stops and knowing what's flowing in and what's flowing out, and being able to set boundaries around what expense is too much, or what energy is too much. That comes from that sense that it's such an important and continuous practice, and probably a lot more packed in there, but it's just something that's coming to mind. we shouldn't just talk about the perhaps negative experiences, but also just the consistent ones. What
Yes.
was consistent, you know? And then I'm thinking, for me, in answer to your question earlier about a situation at work, where I noticed that my boundaries were crossed, and I only realized later why. I think for me, the first thing that came up was returning to work after taking a long break, to look after my partner and to come back into work, losing essentially 18 months, almost 2 years of my career time at this organization, and coming back in and feeling this huge sense of responsibility to reprove myself, to go in and say, you know, to remind everyone how good I am at what I do, to elbow my way into projects so that I was visible, and just to say, hey, I'm back, and I don't want anyone to have forgotten that I'm a valuable member of the team. And I think for me, and I overstretched myself. I think it's overreached, overpromised, and then went, oh, actually, but I need the boundaries I currently have in place, and maybe I'm a different person now, with different needs. But what that takes me back to is always being, as a child, the kind of loudest coroller of all the others. You know, the loudest girl in the room, who at age 6, when we were putting on a show for the parents, I'd hand out roles to the other kids and go, you're going to be this, you're going to be this. And that idea of holding that space as the kind of leader, and totally losing that over the last 2 years of my career before stepping back in, felt so uncomfortable, and actually became the reason I wasn't able to regulate my boundaries well. But that doesn't at all have a root in something negative. It's just who I was as a child.
Yes, and it's very important you brought that up, Sophia. On your title today, it says assistant, and I think this is from your previous coactive session you had. So I think not exactly. So you didn't come back. No, but you know what that just made me reminded me of, that you said you had like 18 months, you know, like a break, and then go back into your leadership role as you have it. It is another subject where, for example, this also comes back to leadership and childhood programming, where mothers, when we give birth, you know, we are away for a year or for 2, and this is exactly what you just described. And Jesus, we have as as mothers, these, if we what we don't want to talk about what you have been through, Sophia, but from the perspective of a mother, imagine how much more you have learned, how much more value you can bring in terms of you know, managing even more responsibilities and stuff like that. So
I actually want to back this up with a story. I mean, one of my friends, one of my closest friends, she's pregnant again. So her son now is 2 years old. And she took her first maternity leave. And I think it's important to note that it's her first, because in some ways, similar to me, it's her first time taking the long time away from work and stepping away from her career. And we had a conversation when we had lunch a few days ago, where she was expressing exactly what you were just saying, you know, how different she is as a person now, what more capacity she has to manage life, the skills she's learned. And I can see that in her too, the level of calm she's achieved in chaos.
absolutely.
But the interesting thing is, she's now pregnant again, and she's had this period of time at work where she knows she's going to leave work again. And she feels totally and utterly confused and lost about how to be at work, because the energy to build herself back up in terms of her position, her leadership, in terms of her, and we're talking about boundaries, so I think I'll make a point about that as well, but how to build herself back up at work and then to disappear again for a year. She feels totally stuck. And we did talk about boundaries, because I was talking to her about having to go back into the office and how I felt about that. And she said, yeah, I've tried really hard not to go if I don't have to, because the feeling of being reintroduced indoctrinated is the wrong word, but of being re-sucked into the culture of the office, of being re-sucked into the career ladder, re-sucked into all those conversations, just for the sake of having to pull away again, is a really complicated boundary setting exercise for her, because she cares deeply about her job, cares deeply about her career, but knows that she has this odd situation where she's about to have to step back again. So there's a real, she's trying to deal with that disconnect, feeling disconnected.
Yeah.
What do you think in this case? What is her childhood programming in this context? What, I mean, this is just an assumption. You can maybe only make an assumption, but what do you think is, connecting her reactions, or what is driving her reactions or actions at work?
We talked about this, so I can share it not as an assumption. I can share it as something she raised herself. She didn't use the phrase, the kind of terminology of childhood programming, but she's very self-aware, and I think historically her self-worth has been very connected to achievement and merit. And at school and as a child, she was like that too. She was a super academic achiever. She was very good at sports. She played instruments. She was one of these that kind of collected accolades as a way of, feeling proud of herself, and for her parents to feel proud of her. And so I think the struggle now is that a lot of the things she feels proud of don't show up at work because they're about her family. So she doesn't feel seen at work, as something I can definitely relate to as well. And she doesn't feel it's worth it to chase the validation, to chase the progression, to chase the feedback, the whatever you want to call it, from work, because she knows she's going to drop out again. So that achiever in her is going, well, I'm not even going to, it's not worth it. And they won't see me. So I'd rather take a full step back. And no, I don't think anyone would say that there's a wrong or a right way to deal with this moment of transition for her. But I think that's what's driving her emotions, that she's not able to be the achiever. Sarah, I can see you're into this one. Yeah,
I am. And I've written all these notes because I'm like, oh, yes, I want to grab hold of that. Because I feel like there's something around our values and our priorities shifting, because we're all in flux.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes we can feel rigidly put in place and keep ourselves in place or stuck, but we are in flux, all of us, and we don't always notice that subtle shifts and nuanced change is occurring until sometimes it's not catastrophic, but it can be in some cases, until it's really conscious and obvious. And I heard you say things around your friend, I think it was, and I think maybe all of us in different ways, where we've questioned how to be in this new situation, how to become more visible if we're going to be pushed to be visible. And I just feel there's something around how when we are in these moments of change, even though we will be maybe driven by childhood programming, and I understand that there are sort of echoes and whispers of that all the way through our lives, there's something for me around what it is to stop and reflect, or be given the opportunity to stop and reflect, and supported in those moments of change where we become aware that our value system and our priorities have changed in accordance with our situation. And so our boundaries, therefore, will have to have changed. But sometimes we don't know what that means, what that looks like, and how we act next. So we feel this pressure upon ourselves to prove ourselves, to become more visible, to try and be the person that we were, or to continue to be accomplished because we were always striving. We were always that, accomplished individual, hyperachiever maybe. But I think being given opportunities to have that space to reflect, and for someone to show you, let's explicitly look at this, look at where your values have changed, look at your boundaries and how this can serve you moving forwards, rather than trying to prove something.
Exactly, Sarah. And moving forward, let's just imagine that that leader, all right? Marcus, 50 years old, or Maria, 50 years old, right? And hitting a wall, like being overwhelmed, being can't sleep, can't think, can't this, can't that, can't, complete on the train of burnout. Yeah. And now imagine that moment when somebody like that has a coaching session where this is the subject, where you start digging into what are these invisible boundaries, because you know your boundary. You know that this is how I deal with my team. This is how I react within my family. You roughly know what you want and what you don't want, or some people know very clearly what they want and what they don't want. But these invisible boundaries, when you hit the wall, when you realize, why? I've always been this super achiever. I've always managed. I've always done this. What is the problem? And when you then when you help somebody to give his or her thoughts shape in the context of how would I have solved the problem as a child, or how would what emotion comes up for me when I have to deal with, like somebody at work who is like, for example, I'm sorry, my thoughts are now drifting in a million ADHD thousand directions, but if you're a leader, you have to deal with somebody at work where you emotionally are not, you can't emotionally align with. That person is a very important person for the team, for example. And emotions always wins. So these kind of energy, when they are on the table, we become the child back in year 5, where somebody took my chocolate or my pencil, and now how do I react with this? Because that's how our brains are actually functioning, right? In a way that you remember that feeling, your brain remembers that feeling, and now you are whatever, grumpy or upset or
About this, may I?
of course.
Which is that it only because I instantly thought, actually, that experience doesn't ring true for me. And I think it has something to do with a different learned boundaries. I'm bringing it up because I think it's super important here.
Okay, yeah, sure.
For me, I have almost never, and I say this with real confidence, had an experience at work where my emotions have overridden, from a relationship standpoint, where my emotions have overridden my rational decision making. And that I think that's because I have such a clear boundary in my mind and in my being about what the problems or the challenges at work are, and what the problems and challenges and trials and tribulations of life are. And I raise that because I think that's why I get the feedback. I mentioned to you both earlier, I get the feedback that I have stronger boundaries than most people at work. And I've often had the feedback too that, in fact, Chris, my partner, says to me all the time, you have this amazing ability of sending food back in a restaurant when it's terrible and still becoming friends with the chef. And it's because I'm capable of this boundary that says, I'm going to talk to you about the food that's bad, but it doesn't connect to you as a human being, to your restaurant, and to our relationship as two people who are dealing with a situation. And so the point you just made about that emotion always winning, I think that's a question of boundaries. It's a question of, it's a question of the boundaries that you set for yourself in the situation that you're in. And to your point about awareness, the way that we can allow people into that awareness is through conversations where they share examples exactly like what you just described, where they go,
exactly. Yeah, I was just leading up to exactly that point, where when you realize that the emotion you've been carrying from something else does not belong here.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at the person from a different perspective, and not from a childhood programming kind of perspective. Look at the facts on the table. and then start again. And you might realize that the big wall you thought is in front of you is crumbling down like nothing, and creates
Agree.
connection and creates better performance, and
Mhm.
makes you feel happier. And that's all you need. Connection.
Can I take that metaphor that you just used there, Claudia,
Sure.
with that wall crumbling down in front of
Yeah.
you, and that wall represents so many things, doesn't it? That hindrance and barrier to communication, that build-up of tension, all of those things. So that's such an image for me in my head. I would also pose that when you learn the skills and the techniques, if you are someone who needs this, as many people, gosh, would envy that ability to have those natural boundaries, Sophia. But when you get the ability to watch or crumble that wall, as a leader in work, as a professional in the work context, it is so extraordinarily powerful, because you have a sense of self, a sense of inner strength, a sense of groundedness that's not a stubborn determination to make your point and to put your armor on. It's not that. It's actually a calmness that settles. And it's so contagious because everything settles around you. But also it's multifaceted, because if you are that leader who is a parent and you go home, when you start to operate in this way, and you know how to crumble those walls, or not to have those walls build up in the first place, the connections and the positivity in the relationship with your family members alters immeasurably.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that about just some hypothetical theory. It's what I have experienced, and it is so powerful. I recognize a different version of myself compared to 10 years ago. It's extraordinary. But
That's
yeah, I just
amazing.
wanted to share that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. It brings up one more thought for me, which is, I suppose, adding to the story that I shared. There is a difference between me as a leader, or people as leaders employed by large organizations where they perhaps feel connection but no ownership. And then the difference between that person and someone who is a founder, an entrepreneur, a CEO, someone who hustled from the ground up to build something, and then that connection between them and their work is of course not going to have the ease of separation that I experienced, or that other people experience in a similar way. And that's where you talking about bringing it home to your family, Sarah, that where I suddenly thought, well, founders often have far less separation, even because they're either, they're running things from home, or there just isn't a disconnect there at all. They're not going from one space to the other. They're not going from workplace to home place. It all is connected. And so the challenge,
and that is another invisible boundary which we are very often not aware of. This is one of the most powerful invisible boundaries that help us to or that leads to feeling dissatisfied, that leads to to that big wall again, because you need to know exactly when to switch into another mode which doesn't belong at home or at work, vice versa, right? And yes, you're extremely good at that, Sophia, and I would like now the opportunity to, I've never asked you, but what do you think people could do to have this ability to, this is actually a superpower. What would you suggest people can do to get to that point? And I want to say one more thing before you answer the question. One is, before you described your friend who knows she will be there now, maybe not for forever, or for 2 years or something like that. That is also an invisible boundary towards the goal of the company, towards an invisible boundary which already sends a certain message out to maybe to the team, and she might not even be aware of how that affects her leadership position. You know, a completely separate subject for another hard talk, because that's a really, really important one. But we need to always keep the company's goal or the family's goal or the life's goal in mind when we talk about our boundaries or when we identify our boundaries. And what I do when I coach people is I always have them either sitting on an island and there's water in between and there is whatever is allowed within their macro organism. We put little post-it notes and we put that onto that island, and the stuff which is not allowed within their comfort zone, within what they feel safe and what they want, we put that outside. We use two different colors, and we do this little exercise. And simply just by writing it down on little notes, on green ones and blue ones, and place this stuff, give this stuff a space, is already so helpful. But tell us what would you recommend to get to a point where you can set better boundaries?
Oh, I mean, a few things that come to mind. One, I have a very comfortable relationship with conflict. And by that, I mean, I understand, and I implicitly, innately, in my body, I understand the difference between a fight between two people and a debate. And yeah, I mean, you know this intently. And talking about childhood programming, I mean, for me, it goes back to conversations with my dad. He's a fierce debater, and it's emotionless, pure logic. And for me, I think I've brought an ability to differentiate. For me, my place of work is a place of debate. It's an emotionless field. It's where those conversations live. And then the more emotional conflict, whether positive or negative, or lives in a different sphere. It's to do with my personal relationships. And it's not that I don't have personal or good relationships at work. It's just, it's a different sphere. I almost imagine it as being a different planet in terms of how to engage. And that allows me to disagree with people fiercely, but to maintain total neutrality. Like have a fight with someone in a meeting, a tussle, but then go to lunch and it's forgotten. So that's something that I think it's learned from my childhood debating and my love for asking questions, but also my comfort with conflict, because I can sense and understand when someone is uncomfortable, and I'm okay with it. And I think that comes back to the point that you made, Sarah, about wanting to placate and mediate, which is also me, but somehow it doesn't touch that sphere. A couple of other things to mention, Mum, before you jump in, but that's one, that kind of familiarity or comfort with conflict. Two, I think it's a few negative experiences of being overstretched, which is, I mean, my first job was as an executive assistant at a private company in the C-suite of New York City, where I was working 27 hours a day at 90 days a week. It was too much, and I gave everything to it. And that was my first experience in my career. So I bounced back from that hugely, because I realized that there needs to be space. And so I've always, in every other role I've had since then, I over communicate. I think I mentioned in our last Hardtalk, I once had a performance review in one of my earlier jobs where I was more junior, where my boss said, everything's going really well. Your metrics look good. Everything looks fine, but you're never at your desk after 7:30, connecting with the team, helping people out. And I remember even at that time, I said to my boss, but that's not a requirement. But I think a lot of people would feel they need to show up there and feel they need to. And I was very grateful for my experience that taught me not to value that differently, to know what that was that the company was asking for. And then the final thing is, I think I learned, particularly in my more recent roles, the power of disclosing. And that's disclosing neurodiversity, that's disclosing what's going on at home, that's disclosing to my leaders and to my peers what I prioritize in my life, and the fact that I'm creating balance. And I think the power of that is to make those things visible. Your boss or your peers can agree or disagree with what's valuable, but if you're saying, I value this, and I do, for a really simple example, I do yoga 2 mornings a week, 8 till 9 o'clock. It's sacred time for me, and it's for my mental health, it's for my personal space. And so at work, they know that I won't be at my computer until 10 on those days. Of course, you have to have trust. You have to build trust and all of those valuable things. But once you get to that point where you're able to say, here are the things in my life I prioritize, and I will keep telling you about them. I'll keep bringing that in. That's how you make those, to your point about the Post-its, I'm bringing those Post-its into work and I'm going, this is part of my, and then people, I think, respond well. They respect that because they see that you're being clear. Those are my 3.
Yeah.
To manage, then I have to ask you another question. How do you manage then when you have like a tough conversation, you know, with a team member or with your boss, and you have a tough conversation? How do you manage to go for lunch later and say, hey, everything is fine? You know, how do you manage not to hurt somebody's feelings, or even more important, make somebody feel scared of his or her position, holding his or her position? You know, that's when you have like when you clearly say what you want and what you need, and if it's exactly what actually what reflects the company's goal. You know, if somebody maybe didn't pick that really up, or lives and works there and doesn't even realize what is the goal, what is the value of the company, so how do you
I think,
actually connect it with people while you're disconnecting emotionally? Sorry, that's a difficult question. Yeah.
No, but immediately something comes up for me, and I don't want to put myself on a pedestal and say I do this well, but I think of the leaders that I've respected and disagreed with, or just, you know, enjoyed a debate with, it's because I know their values. I know their values, and I know where they are coming from. I even had a coaching session recently with an apprentice that I work with, so not a private client, having similar challenges with her boss. And we had a conversation about values and about being able to find the root of something. So we talked about what she sees from him in terms of what he demands and his demeanor and everything. And we worked backwards towards what value that might be connected to. And if you can work backwards towards the value, it just gives you that ability to empathize. It gives you that ability to understand the perspective. And even if you don't agree, you at least have the psychological safety of knowing it has nothing to do with the person wanting you out of your job or hating you as an individual. They simply have a value that's driving them to make that, to be so hard on that piece, or to, you know, or to make those decisions, or to, so I think what I would hope that people would say about me when I disagree with them is that they know where I'm coming from from a values perspective. And that is
Can I jump in? If so needs to jump in, I'm so sorry. So I'm imagining working with you, and I'm imagining being in your sphere. And I would imagine that because of this grounded presence that you have, that you come across, because you do, from what I know of you through the screen, as very authentic. And I mean that authenticity in the broadest, deepest sense of the word. And when you're in the presence of someone who you sense is being truly authentic, someone who is absolutely connected to their values, you innately trust them. and there is less going on in your head. So people who work with leaders or other professionals who have a real sense of themselves and their values and their boundaries, we don't make up so many stories in our heads. And of course, we know that our brains do that. They leap to assumptions and they start creating stories that often do not serve us. We start to form masses of assumptions about somebody and what they might be thinking of us or how they might be judging us. And it gets a really noisy place to be in that head. So I think this is what I'm imagining in being in a workplace with you, or with the kind of leaders that you're describing and the leaders I've worked with in the past, where there is an easiness and a flow in the interaction with those people. It's not complicated. I don't feel there's a subtext going on under the surface. We don't have to constantly be second guessing ourselves or what they actually want or what we have to do more to prove ourselves, because that stillness and that settled, robust way of being in that professional relationship is so powerful when it works in that way. So I think I bring it back to authenticity, and I bring it back to something I read this morning, which was someone I love, Susan David, Emotional Agility, love her. And she said, to cultivate authenticity with your team, try checking in with yourself and the people around you on a regular basis. Notice if you're speaking honestly or posturing. And the moment you are posturing, the moment you're becoming performative, that authenticity just drops away and we don't trust so much.
And
So
people sense it immediately. I
they
think they
really
sense it
do, right?
immediately.
They really
Just
do.
to
So nuanced.
to bring something in from coactive coaching, something that we do a lot, is, and I think it's now coming up. I've never made this connection before, but I think some people are naturally kind of better or more inclined to do this than others. Two things in the coactive kind of practice, which are acknowledgement and blurting, which blurting intuition. And the acknowledgement is simply stopping and saying to someone that you might be disagreeing with or having a conversation with, or obviously in the coaching context, you simply acknowledge what you're seeing. So I realize, Sarah, I hear you talking about this, and I realize this is so important to you, and I feel you're talking from a place of such authentic experience. Just acknowledge that. And then to blurt is to blurt intuition, to say, I have a sense that this is going on for you, but what do you think of that? And so you're giving people an insight into your inner world of the stories that are forming, but you're offering that as a, just offering it out to see whether it lands or whether it's the reality. And I think that connectedness to authenticity that those two practices bring have a really important role in leadership.
Yes.
Even if you're disagreeing on something, to be able to say to somebody, I see how important this is to you, and I see that you really value trust, honesty, integrity. Mm-hmm. You're then able to disagree about everything else, but at least you agree.
Because you fully see that person and you relate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's something from a boundaries perspective, to bring it back to the original question, those boundaries that you set by creating psychological safety and by creating psychological safety by holding your space, and showing who you are and acknowledging the other person for who they are. Yeah, I think that's a really important element.
And it's a trust builder, a massive trust builder.
I love this talk, and I have a million thoughts.
Let's keep going.
Yeah, but I really love this, but I want to wrap it up. I want to wrap up this session now because we are much longer than usual. But I want to wrap it up or summarize it, that this invisible boundaries which we're talking about. There are a few components which working with our clients can really help them to, with simple tools, help them to get to that point, like you said, Sophia, where you are, zooming yourself in and out of different levels or zones or responsibilities. And that is so important. And I want to thank you for this, because it made me click a lot today, that I do that, but there is still sometimes blurriness, and
Always.
I think I want to work for myself on this blurriness a little bit more. And so to summarize, we have to have an awareness of our childhood programming. And even if that is simply, I had a rugby coach, or I had a sports coach who gave me A, B, C, and that's what I bring to my team. And I, like very often from sports, you have people bringing amazing leadership abilities to the
Principles,
table,
yeah.
to principles to the table. So the awareness, what is my childhood programming based on? Is it that positive, or is it that, like my mother, who was already born with having no boundaries and could never step up, and but she still was a great leader. She was a quiet, amazing leader, but in her own way. So it's not that people, who don't have boundaries cannot be leaders or cannot succeed as leaders. They just need to see, do I need to carry that old rubbish? Yes or no? No. Okay, move on. Go ahead. Express yourself. So awareness. Then the next very important thing is values. Do you know your values? Do you know your family values, your personal values, your employer's values, and do you know your team values? And I think, and that's what I do in my coaching, the 10 golden rules. What are your golden rules in your family with your children, for example? What are your 10 golden rules? With like as what's the vision ahead for your company or for your team? And what values do you need so that it functions, and not have 15 people with different values pulling on some kind of string that has, the rope, which has so many different, when you cut it, so everybody pulls somehow on the same, but not really powerfully.
Yeah.
So awareness, values, authenticity, help me.
Authenticity.
Thank you. That's not the German word for sure. So that you really say that, this is who I am, and this is what I really deeply care about. And if it is my horse riding, or my yoga, or my, my book club, or my whatever, I have no time to show up for you because that is important. But when I show up for you, I'm here. And and identify childhood patterns, which becomes part of awareness, and to have a sense of self. And Sarah, you said something in our recent coaching session where you said, see your body in space. And that was really good, because that triggered a lot of deep thinking for me, because I put myself in space. First I thought, in space, what space does she mean, space? But to put myself to put myself in a space which is a room, to put myself in a space which is a city, to put myself in space which is a country, and to put my space into my room to talk international, where I'm connecting with people from all over, or where we connecting with people from all over the world through body wisdom. And this sense of self in different rooms and different spaces is a very good one.
Yeah.
Great coaching subject that can break so many walls down.
Yeah. I love that. Can I ask a closing question?
Of course, Sophia.
Because I shared about my kind of really fixed and strict boundaries, particularly, I mean, yoga is a good example. And I'd just like to know from the two of you, which are your strongest boundaries, your most comfortable and most well-enforced personal boundaries?
Oh my God, Sophia, you open like
Gosh, yeah, now we need to think
you.
about that. Might be one to take away
Yeah,
and
we can
come
take that
back
away.
with.
We can
But
take it away. In then corrective, we'd call that leaving you with an inquiry
Yeah,
to journal on, just to see,
yeah.
which are the things almost that you innately don't even think about, and that's what you enforce.
And mine will be wrapped up in the parental role because that's the innate. Interesting.
well, I have certain boundaries when obviously I wear two hats. I wear the coaching hat and I wear the designer hat. And I have so many boundaries, but I think one of the strongest boundaries I have is that I do not allow people into a space when I'm creative. So while, like, for example, when I'm producing work, creative work, and everybody knows that. And it's also something I think I don't have to even say it out loud. My team knows when I'm in my creative space, when I'm creating boards, when I'm creating material boards, or when I create rooms, there is nobody actually disturbing me. And yeah, and then there would be like food for thoughts for another 3 hours
Yeah.
of
Gosh, yes, you've got me
Yeah.
thinking. That's
yeah.
so interesting. What
But
a fabulous talk.
yeah, that question was really
Yeah.
good. And it's so simple. Yeah. Hey, I thank you so much for being here with me and for being so open and so creative and being you as always. And I'm looking forward to our next hard talk, which will be likely I'm thinking about maybe even connecting to boundaries, but I want to talk a little bit about epigenetics and how these kind of things, hormones and neurotransmitter and things like that, how they affect our leadership roles, or how they can improve better performance and well-being, so that our clients can lead with energy and not just use their energy to survive.
Love that.
Love you and leave you. Lots of love. See you soon. All the best. Bye bye.